Hey everyone! Before we dive into one of the most extraordinary tank battles of World War II, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these incredible stories to life. And trust me, what you're about to witness is something that changed the course of armored warfare forever. Now, let's get into it. August 8, 1944. Near the village of Saint-Aignan in Normandy, a 21-year-old British tank gunner named Joe Ekins sat in his Sherman Firefly, watching 3 German Tiger tanks advance across an open field. He had fired his powerful 17-pounder gun exactly 5 times in practice. That's it. 5 rounds before being thrown into combat against the most feared tanks in the world. In the next 12 minutes, he would destroy all 3 Tigers. One of those Tigers contained Michael Wittmann, Germany's greatest tank ace, a man so legendary that Hitler himself had attended his wedding. Wittmann had destroyed 138 Allied tanks. He was invincible, untouchable. The propaganda posters said so. The newsreels proved it. Until that moment, when a modified Sherman, a tank the Germans mockingly called a Tommy Cooker, fired a single shot that sent Wittmann's 57-ton Tiger erupting in flames, its turret blown completely off the hull. How did this happen? How could a supposedly inferior American tank destroy the pride of the Panzerwaffe? The answer lies in one of the war's most desperate and brilliant improvisations. This is that story. The summer of 1944 was supposed to be different. After D-Day, Allied forces had finally returned to continental Europe, but 6 weeks after the beaches, they were still trapped in the Normandy bocage, the deadly hedgerow country where every field was a fortress and every lane a potential killing ground. The British and Canadians faced the bulk of German armored strength, including the SS Panzer divisions with their Tigers and Panthers. 4 Allied tank crews, this was a nightmare scenario. The standard M4 Sherman, armed with a 75mm gun, could barely scratch the frontal armor of a Tiger at combat ranges. It typically took 5 Shermans to destroy 1 Tiger, and 4 of those Shermans would likely burn. The crews knew the odds. They called their tanks Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter, because they lit up so easily. British tankers had a darker joke: a Ronson lights first time, every time. The Tiger I weighed 57 tons, carried armor up to 120mm thick, and mounted the legendary 88mm gun that could kill a Sherman from 2,000 yards. Its reputation preceded it like thunder. German crews were confident to the point of arrogance. Why wouldn't they be? In Tunisia, Sicily, and Russia, Tigers had proven nearly unstoppable. Allied tank crews who faced them developed what commanders called Tiger Fright, a psychological paralysis born from knowing you were outgunned, out-armored, and likely to die. But among the standard Shermans rolling through Normandy's deadly hedgerows was a different breed of tank. It looked almost identical to a regular Sherman, except for one crucial difference: an absurdly long gun barrel that protruded far beyond the front of the tank. These were Sherman Fireflies, and they carried Britain's powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, a weapon that could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at standard combat ranges. The Germans had no idea these tanks existed. When they discovered them, it would be through the most brutal teacher of all, combat. And the lessons would be written in burning steel and shattered myths. This is the story of how British desperation produced a weapon that terrified the seemingly invincible, how young men with minimal training faced down legendary aces, and how one remarkable gun turned Tommy Cookers into Tiger killers. By 1942, British tank development was in crisis. Years of failed designs had produced a parade of mechanical disasters, tanks that broke down, caught fire, or simply couldn't compete with German armor. The Crusader was unreliable. The Cromwell couldn't fit a powerful gun. The Challenger was perpetually delayed. Meanwhile, German Panthers and Tigers were dominating battlefields from Russia to North Africa. The Americans had supplied Britain with thousands of M4 Shermans through Lend-Lease, and while the Sherman was mechanically reliable and easy to maintain, its 75mm gun was woefully inadequate against the latest German armor. British crews in North Africa and Sicily had learned this the hard way, watching their shells bounce harmlessly off Panther and Tiger armor before being obliterated in return. The British did have one ace in their deck: the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. Introduced in 1942, this 76.2mm weapon was among the most powerful anti-tank guns in the world. It could penetrate 163mm of armor at 500 yards with standard ammunition, and with specialized APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds, it could theoretically defeat any German tank at any likely combat range. The problem was mobility. The 17-pounder was a towed gun, vulnerable and difficult to position quickly. What the British needed was to mount the 17-pounder in a tank. But their own tank designs couldn't accommodate it. The turret rings were too small, the development timelines too long. Frustration mounted as intelligence reports revealed that the Germans were fielding far more Panthers than anticipated. The Panther wasn't a rare heavy tank like the Tiger, it was becoming the standard German medium tank, and Allied crews had nothing that could reliably fight it. Enter two persistent British officers, Major George Brighty and Lieutenant Colonel George Wytheridge. In late 1943, they refused to accept the official rejection of mounting the 17-pounder in the Sherman. Working almost clandestinely, they jury-rigged a 17-pounder into a Sherman's turret, cutting away the co-driver's position to make room for the massive breech and ammunition storage. It was inelegant, cramped, and required the crew to work in impossibly tight quarters. But it worked. When tests proved successful, enthusiasm exploded. Winston Churchill himself declared the Firefly the highest priority. By January 1944, production began in earnest. By D-Day, 342 Fireflies had been delivered to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. The standard British tank troop now consisted of 3 regular Shermans and 1 Firefly. The Firefly crews were told to hang back, to hide their distinctive long barrels, and to engage only the most dangerous targets. The Germans had no idea these predators lurked among the seemingly helpless Sherman herds. They were about to find out in the most devastating way possible. The myth of Tiger invincibility was about to shatter on the fields of Normandy. The Tiger tank wasn't just a weapon, it was a psychological phenomenon. From the moment it appeared on the Eastern Front in 1942, the Tiger had acquired an almost mythological status. Soviet tankers spoke of it in hushed tones. British and American crews who encountered it in Tunisia came back with stories of invulnerability. The Tiger's 88mm gun could kill at ranges where return fire was impossible. Its thick armor laughed off standard anti-tank rounds. German propaganda amplified this reputation mercilessly. Newsreels showed Tigers crushing through enemy positions, invincible and unstoppable. Tank aces like Michael Wittmann became household names in Germany, credited with scores of enemy tanks destroyed. When Wittmann single-handedly destroyed an entire British armored column at Villers-Bocage on June 13, 1944, taking out over 20 tanks and numerous other vehicles in minutes, it seemed to confirm every myth about Tiger superiority. Allied tankers absorbed these stories. Intelligence briefings warned them, the Tiger is superior in every way. Don't engage frontally. Call for air support. Wait for tank destroyers. This wasn't cowardice, it was reality. The math was brutal. A Sherman 75mm gun could only penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor if it got within 200 yards, and by that range, the Tiger had usually already fired several killing shots. The psychological impact was devastating. Crews developed Tiger fright, a tendency to identify every German tank as a Tiger, to freeze when encountering one, to assume defeat before the first shot was fired. Post-action reports documented instances where Sherman crews abandoned their tanks upon seeing Tigers, even before being fired upon. German tank crews knew this and exploited it ruthlessly. They developed aggressive tactics, advancing boldly, knowing that Allied tanks would typically retreat or attempt to flank at ranges where the Tiger held every advantage. Tiger commanders like Wittmann didn't just destroy enemy tanks, they shattered enemy morale. But there was a dangerous gap between myth and reality that German crews didn't fully appreciate. The Tiger's armor was formidable but not impenetrable. Its side and rear armor were vulnerable. Its mechanical complexity made it prone to breakdowns. More Tigers were lost to mechanical failures than to enemy action. And while German crews trained extensively, Allied crews were learning too, developing tactics to overcome the Tiger's advantages. Most critically, the Germans didn't know about the Firefly. Intelligence had failed them. The Firefly looked almost identical to a standard Sherman from most angles. In the chaos of combat, with dust, smoke, and hedgerows obscuring visibility, German crews couldn't distinguish the long-barreled Fireflies from regular Shermans until it was too late. They didn't know that among the prey, there were now predators. This information gap would prove fatal. German tank commanders continued to advance with a confidence born of 2 years of dominance, expecting the same panicked retreats and futile resistance they'd always encountered. They were advancing into a trap they didn't know existed, facing a weapon that could kill them at ranges they considered safe. The myth was about to meet reality, and reality carried a 17-pounder gun. Normandy in August 1944 was a hell specifically designed to kill tanks. The Bocage country, the ancient hedgerow region that covered much of the invasion area, had evolved over centuries into a patchwork of small fields bordered by earthen banks crowned with dense hedges. Each field was effectively a separate fortress, visibility was measured in dozens of yards, and maneuver was channeled into narrow lanes that became deadly funnels. For tankers, this terrain was a nightmare. You couldn't see the enemy until you were practically on top of them. Ambushes could come from any direction. The raised hedgerows provided perfect hull-down positions for defenders while forcing attackers to expose themselves climbing over or pushing through. Tank battles in Normandy often happened at ranges under 500 yards, knife-fighting distance where speed of engagement was everything. The area around Saint-Aignan de Kremsnil, where our story unfolds on August 8, 1944, offered a rare exception: open ground. After weeks of grinding through the Bocage, British and Canadian forces had finally broken into more open terrain south of Caen during Operation Totalize. Here, gentle rolling hills and scattered woods replaced the claustrophobic hedgerows. Visibility extended to over 1,000 yards in places. For Allied forces, this was both blessing and curse. Open ground meant they could maneuver, but it also meant German Tigers could engage at the ranges where they were most deadly. The morning of August 8 had seen British and Canadian forces push forward through the night, seizing key villages and high ground. The 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, a British tank regiment, had advanced to a position near a wood called the Del de la Roque, just south of Saint-Aignan. The wood offered excellent concealment. From its southern edge, British tankers could observe the open fields stretching toward the village of Synthos to the south. Route Nationale 158, the main road, cut across their front. The position was perfect for a defensive ambush: good sightlines, concealment, and the ability to withdraw into the woods if necessary. The weather was clear but hazy, with morning mist still clinging to low-lying areas. Visibility was good but not perfect, enough to spot targets at 800 to 1,000 yards, but with details obscured by distance and atmospheric conditions. The sun was climbing toward midday, creating heat shimmer that made range estimation challenging. The ground between the woods and Synthos was mostly open farmland, dotted with the occasional hedgerow and stone wall. A few scattered buildings marked farm complexes. Most critically, there was little cover. Any tanks crossing this ground would be exposed for the entire journey. It was terrain that favored the defender, terrain that gave every advantage to whoever struck first from concealment. In the Del de la Roque woods, Sergeant Gordon's Firefly crew waited in their assigned position with 3 troop of a squadron. They'd been in position for hours, tense and watchful. They'd heard reports of German counterattacks developing. They knew Tigers were in the area. They just didn't know when or where they'd appear. They wouldn't have to wait long. It was approximately 12:30 p.m. when the first reports crackled over the radio: German armor moving north toward Saint-Aignan. The counterattack everyone had anticipated was finally coming. In the Del de la Roque woods, crews tensed at their positions. Commanders scanned the southern approaches with binoculars. Gunners double-checked their sights. Loaders confirmed ammunition readiness. Sergeant Douglas Gordon commanded the Firefly in 3 troop, a squadron. His gunner was Trooper Joe Ekins, a 21-year-old from Rushden, Northamptonshire. Ekins had joined the Yeomanry only months earlier and had fired his 17-pounder gun exactly 5 times in practice before being thrust into combat. 5 rounds. That was all the training he'd received with a weapon that was now Britain's only reliable answer to German heavy armor. Gordon kept his head out of the turret hatch despite the danger. It gave him a better field of view than the cramped periscopes inside. He was scanning the fields to the south when he spotted them: dark shapes emerging from the direction of Synthos, moving north along and adjacent to Route Nationale 158. Tigers. Multiple Tigers. "Traverse right," Gordon ordered quietly, his voice calm despite the adrenaline. Tigers advancing, range approximately 800 yards. Inside the turret, Ekins cranked the traverse wheel, swinging the long barrel of the 17-pounder toward the targets. The Firefly's turret was cramped. The massive breech of the 17-pounder took up so much space that the crew had to work in uncomfortable positions. Ekins settled his eye against the rubber cup of the telescopic sight and began scanning. The 3 tigers advancing in a rough line, the closest one slightly behind and to the right of the other 2. They were moving boldly, confidently, their commanders probably visible in their turret hatches, scanning for threats. They knew Allied tanks were in the area, but they didn't seem concerned. Why would they be? They were tigers. Gordon made a critical tactical decision. Rather than targeting the closest or most threatening tank, he ordered Ekins to aim for the rear tiger first. The psychology was sound. If they destroyed the rear tank first, the other 2 crews might not immediately notice, giving the Firefly crucial seconds for follow-up shots. If they hit the lead tank, the others would instantly know they were under fire and could respond. "Gunner," Gordon said, his voice steady. "Target rear tiger. Aim for the hull side if possible. Fire when ready." Ekins tracked the target, his inexperience actually working in his favor. He hadn't developed any bad habits, and his natural shooting ability was excellent. He'd been known as a crack shot in training despite his limited experience. The tiger was moving slowly across his sight picture, presenting a clean profile shot. The range was about 800 yards, well within the 17-pounder's lethal range, but requiring precise aim. He took a breath. Held it. The crosshairs settled on the tiger's hull, just below the turret ring where the side armor was thinnest. His finger tightened on the trigger. The Firefly bucked violently as the 17-pounder roared. The report of the 17-pounder was catastrophic, a shattering blast that made even experienced crewmen flinch. The muzzle flash was so brilliant that both Gordon and Ekins had to blink reflexively, momentarily blinded. This was one of the Firefly's few drawbacks. The tremendous flash could blind the crew just when they needed to observe the shot's effect. For a heartbeat, smoke and dust obscured everything. Then the air cleared, and Gordon saw smoke rising from the rear tiger. "Hit," he called. But had they penetrated? Had they? The question answered itself spectacularly. The tiger erupted. Not just smoke, flame and debris blasting skyward. The ammunition must have cooked off because the violence of the explosion was shocking even to veterans. The tiger's turret, all 11 tons of it, was blown completely off the hull, flipping through the air before crashing back to Earth upside down several yards away. The hull blazed like a bonfire, black smoke pouring into the clear afternoon sky. "Target destroyed!" Gordon shouted. "Traverse left. Next target. Quickly now." Ekins was already moving, cranking the traverse wheel. The middle tiger was still advancing, its crew apparently unaware their comrade had been destroyed. The battlefield was loud, chaotic, and the surviving tigers were buttoned up, their commanders inside with hatches closed. The second tiger crossed Ekins's sight. He didn't hesitate. The 17-pounder crashed again. Another hit. This one struck the turret, and though there was no spectacular explosion, the tiger lurched to a halt, smoke pouring from hatches and vision ports. Mission killed. Whether the crew was dead or simply abandoning the vehicle didn't matter. That tiger was out of the fight. Third target. Gordon's voice had an edge of urgency now. The element of surprise was gone. The lead tiger had to know something was catastrophically wrong. Its commander would be scanning, trying to identify the threat, trying to locate the invisible enemy that was destroying his platoon. But Joe Ekins was faster. Years later, historians would marvel at what happened next. In approximately 12 minutes, some accounts say less, Ekins fired and hit 3 of the most feared tanks in the world. This wasn't just luck or equipment superiority. This was extraordinary shooting under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The third tiger took the killing shot to its flank. Like its platoon mate, it exploded with devastating violence, the fireball visible across the battlefield. Whether this tank contained Michael Wittmann, Germany's greatest tank ace, remains debated by historians to this day. What's certain is that Wittmann's Tiger, number 007, was destroyed in this engagement. Whether Ekins's shot killed him or another Firefly's round did the deed, the symbolic impact was the same. The seemingly invincible had been destroyed by a supposedly inferior American tank mounting a British gun. Gordon ordered the Firefly to back into the woods, away from any potential return fire. His crew had just accomplished something extraordinary, something that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. They'd destroyed 3 tigers in minutes. And the battle wasn't over. The destruction of the tigers rippled across the battlefield like a shockwave. For German forces, this was beyond disaster, it was existential crisis. Tigers didn't die like this. Tigers were supposed to dominate the battlefield, not explode like fireworks. The psychological impact was devastating. German radio traffic, later intercepted and analyzed, revealed the confusion and fear that gripped the survivors. Crews reported being engaged by unknown British tanks at impossible ranges. Some reports initially claimed the Tigers had been hit by anti-tank guns, not tanks. The idea that a Sherman could destroy a Tiger from 800 yards was literally unbelievable to German crews who dominated Allied armor for 2 years. The propaganda machine had created a monster it couldn't control. Years of newsreels and radio broadcasts proclaiming Tiger invincibility had convinced not just the German public but German tankers themselves that their machines were unstoppable. Now that myth shattered in the most brutal way possible. Some German crews, seeing Tigers burning, assumed they'd been hit by artillery or airstrikes, anything except enemy tanks. As the Germans began capturing disabled Fireflies and examining their long-barreled guns, realization dawned. These weren't standard Shermans. Orders went out across German armored units. Prioritize the long-barreled Shermans. Kill the Fireflies first. They're the dangerous ones. This recognition was actually an extraordinary compliment, and it came with a price. German tank crews and anti-tank gun crews were ordered to identify and eliminate Fireflies as their primary target. In any engagement, ignore the regular Shermans and hunt the Fireflies. This tactical decision acknowledged what German propaganda couldn't. There was an Allied tank that could kill Tigers. But the Germans' reaction also revealed British success. Firefly crews responded by camouflaging their distinctive guns. They painted the protruding barrel with countershading patterns, white on the bottom, dark green on top, to create an optical illusion that made the gun appear shorter from a distance. Some crews wrapped camouflage netting around the barrel. Others simply tried to keep their tanks hidden until the crucial moment of engagement. The psychological reversal was complete. For years, Allied tankers had suffered from Tiger fright, that paralyzing fear of facing superior German armor. Now German crews experienced something similar, Firefly fear, if you will. They knew that hidden among the Sherman herds might be a predator that could kill them before they even identified the threat. Allied morale soared. Tank crews who'd spent weeks feeling helpless and outgunned suddenly had hope. Every tank squadron had Fireflies. Every engagement meant the possibility that German heavy armor could be destroyed. The confidence that comes from having competitive equipment transformed Allied tactics from defensive to aggressive. Veterans later recalled this psychological shift. Ken Tout, who served in the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, described the Firefly as giving Allied crews a fighting chance where before we had none. It wasn't just about the gun or the armor penetration statistics, it was about morale, confidence, and the knowledge that you weren't simply driving to your death. The myth of invincibility, once shattered, could never be fully restored. The Tigers were still dangerous, still deadly, but no longer invincible. And in warfare, psychology often matters as much as firepower. The immediate aftermath of the engagement at Saint-Aignan was brutal and chaotic. 3 Tigers burned in the open field, their hulls glowing orange, ammunition continuing to cook off in sporadic explosions. The distinctive smell of burning metal, fuel, and worse hung heavy in the August air. For the German counterattack, this was catastrophe. The Tigers were supposed to spearhead the assault, to smash through British positions and retake lost ground. Instead, they'd been destroyed within minutes of making contact. But the battle wasn't over for Joe Ekins and Sergeant Gordon's Firefly crew. Shortly after destroying the 3 Tigers, the main German counterattack developed against C Squadron of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry. A squadron, including Gordon's Firefly, moved to support them. In the ensuing combat, Ekins destroyed a Panzer IV before disaster struck. Their Firefly took a hit, likely from a German anti-tank gun. The round punched through armor, wounding Gordon and forcing the crew to bail out. They survived, but their remarkable tank was knocked out. After the battle, Ekins was reassigned to another tank as a radio operator, a strange demotion for someone who'd just achieved one of the war's most remarkable feats of gunnery. But the British Army rarely celebrated individual soldiers during the war, and Ekins's achievement wouldn't be widely recognized until decades later. The human cost of the engagement was severe on both sides. Michael Wittmann, if he was indeed in one of the Tigers destroyed by Ekins, died instantly. There would have been no time to react, no time to bail out. The violence of a penetrating 17-pounder round igniting ammunition or fuel was absolute. Wittmann's body wasn't recovered until 1983, when the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgrabversorgung excavated the field and identified his remains. German records show that Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101, the heavy SS tank battalion, lost 6 Tigers in the Saint-Aignan area on August 8. This was catastrophic. Tigers were irreplaceable assets, each one worth 5 or more standard tanks. The psychological blow was even worse than the material loss. These weren't obsolete tanks knocked out by overwhelming numbers. These were the latest, most feared heavy tanks, destroyed by weapons the Germans had dismissed as inferior. Allied losses in the engagement were relatively light, though exact numbers are difficult to determine from unit records. Several Shermans were knocked out, including Gordon's Firefly, but crew casualties were minimal compared to what they might have been. The Firefly crew's tactical advantage, engaging from concealment at range, had saved lives. The broader Operation Totalize, of which this engagement was part, achieved mixed results. The initial objectives were captured, but German resistance prevented the breakthrough Allied commanders had hoped for. Still, the tank engagement at Saint-Aignan stood out as a clear tactical victory and an important symbolic moment. For historians, this engagement demonstrated several crucial lessons. Technological innovation mattered. Crew training and tactics could overcome numerical and qualitative disadvantages, and psychological factors were as important as armor thickness and gun caliber in determining combat outcomes. But at the most human level, it was a story of young men thrust into impossible situations who somehow found the courage and skill to prevail. The Battle of Saint-Aignan and Joe Ekins's extraordinary shooting became iconic examples of how the Firefly transformed Allied armor capabilities. But the Firefly's impact extended far beyond single engagements. From D-Day in June 1944 through the end of the war in Europe, approximately 2,100 to 2,200 Fireflies were produced, and they served in every major British and Canadian armored formation. The Firefly's combat record was remarkable. In virtually every major engagement where Tigers or Panthers appeared, Fireflies were credited with the kills. On June 9, 1944, Trooper G.K. Henry's Firefly knocked out 5 Panthers in rapid succession from the 12th SS Panzer Division at Norriene-Bessin. On June 14, Sergeant Harris of the 4th/7th Dragoon Guards destroyed 5 Panthers around Lingevres, changing position between shots to avoid return fire. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the norm when Firefly crews had the first shot. Statistics bear out the Firefly's effectiveness. Despite being priority targets for German gunners, Fireflies actually had lower casualty rates than standard Shermans. This seemingly paradoxical fact resulted from several factors. Firefly crews were typically more experienced, they engaged from greater ranges where German return fire was less accurate, and they were positioned in support roles rather than leading assaults. The tactical lessons learned from Firefly employment influenced post-war tank design. The British learned that gunpowder mattered more than armor in tank-versus-tank combat. This philosophy would inform the development of British tanks like the Centurion, which prioritized firepower and mobility over heavy armor. The Americans, initially resistant to upgrading the Sherman's gun, eventually fielded 76 mm armed Shermans and learned similar lessons. Perhaps most significantly, the Firefly demonstrated the importance of adaptive improvisation in warfare. The British Army had spent years trying to develop the perfect tank, the Challenger, the Cromwell with its various upgrades, while the stopgap solution proved more effective than any of these purpose-built designs. Sometimes the best weapon is the one you can field immediately rather than the ideal weapon you'll have eventually. For the men who crewed the Fireflies, the legacy was deeply personal. Many, like Joe Ekins, returned to civilian life and tried to put the war behind them. Ekins went back to working in shoe factories near his hometown of Rushden, became a factory manager, married his sweetheart Gwen, and raised a family. He maintained a low profile for decades, rarely speaking about his wartime service. It wasn't until the 1980s, when historian Les Taylor and veteran Ken Tout began investigating Wittmann's death, that Ekins's role became widely known. Even then, he remained characteristically humble. In one of his few interviews, he simply said, "I was just doing my job." We all were. The Firefly served with distinction not just in Western Europe but also in Italy and later with armies around the world. After the war, Fireflies were used by Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, and other nations well into the 1950s. But the Firefly's greatest legacy may be psychological. It proved that innovation, adaptation, and courage could overcome seemingly insurmountable technological advantages. It showed that myths of invincibility were just that, myths, waiting to be shattered by the right weapon in capable hands. The Germans learned to fear the long-barreled Shermans lurking in the hedgerows and woods of northwest Europe. And that fear was well earned. So there you have it, the story of how a 21-year-old factory worker from Northamptonshire, armed with 5 practice rounds worth of training, destroyed 3 Tiger tanks in 12 minutes and helped shatter one of World War II's most enduring myths. The Sherman Firefly wasn't supposed to be the solution to Allied armor problems. It was a desperate improvisation, a stopgap measure until better tanks arrived. But sometimes the best solutions come from necessity and ingenuity rather than elaborate planning. The Firefly proved that technological superiority isn't destiny, that adaptation and courage can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, and that every myth of invincibility has its breaking point. 3 tigers burning in a French field on an August afternoon marked that breaking point. Here's a question for you. If you were in Joe Ekins' position, 21 years old, minimal training, facing the most feared tanks in the world, would you have had the nerve to fire? What would have been going through your mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. History is filled with remarkable moments like this, and your support helps us bring them to light. Thanks for watching.